Look, our Professor of Education out of the University of Newcastle, John Fischetti. And, well, first, John, welcome back. Secondly, today we want to have a look at something that really has been an ongoing concern for parents, educators, everybody that has kids and grandkids. And we're talking about the other side of social media today.
Yeah, and we've touched on this a number of times over the years, Mark, but the data is finally coming in of what I think our worst fears are true. I don't know if you followed the story of Frances Hogan, who is the 37-year-old former Facebook employee who whistle blew on Facebook and testified to the U.S. Congress and is now advising EU and UK governments about what Facebook has deliberately done to manipulate all of us, but particularly teenagers, with exactly what we thought was the worst case scenario.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the big tech, a lot of the social media, it can be a bit freaky. I mean, you'll be sitting there just, if we have a chat before we come on usually about what TV or movies we've been into. I reckon if we go to our social media later on, you'll be bombarded with movie adverts and cinemas and things like that. That it's very linked in, very freaky stuff.
Well, the couple $1 billion supercomputer that Facebook has is deliberately eavesdropping, using algorithms, which are these predictor software tools that allow them to determine what your preferences are and feed you those preferences, and almost exclusively negative ones. So what they were able to find out through emails that she found when she took on her role in the company and kind of ethics control was that Facebook wasn't really worried about that at all. They were worried about increasing membership and increasing profit. And what they do is if you have a post that's reacted to negatively, they look for ones with the comments that are the longest and the most vile. They prioritize those and feed them to the top. And so the more negative feeds the most negative. And so all you really get is negative feed, which makes most of us now, 2004 is when Facebook started, but this really started in earnest about 2007, where they really started to manipulate us. And in certain places, the number one way in which people get their information, from news to gossip, is through social media. It might have moved to TikTok from Facebook with young people, but it's deliberately feeding you things that make you feel worse about the people around you, the world, and particularly yourself.
So is there thought process there that the more negativity we feed in, the more engaged we will be in the process, therefore we'll be spending more time on the platform, therefore more likes, more shares, more activity, more money?
And nobody really much cares where I went to dine last night. I mean, here's a picture of my food. All that might be for your grandmother or something. But what people really want to know is what's negative. And, in politics now, some candidates have actually won as a result of feeding information. That information then confirms some other people's beliefs, but it's now become concerted campaigns of governments like the Russian government to actually seed, the Chinese government to seed other countries in Europe, the United States, and Australia to get people just in discontent. China is now doing that with Taiwan, where they're feeding information across to get people upset. Once we've been rewired, and at least for the last 10 years, this has been big time, we've changed who we are. We assume negative. We're angrier. Even in this new post-COVID, whatever we are in, most people now aren't themselves because they've only been watching and reading those things which are pitched to them that feed that negative instinct. Teenagers then, who are much more vulnerable because their brains are still evolving and they're not fully mature, are actually now turning into the worst versions of themselves, or always stressed or always worried. None of that looks right unless we can turn it around. The good news is we can.
Well, here's the thing, though, John. When you look at kids we'll do the whole lot, infants, primary, and even high school, everyone in that entire block has gone through their entire life and not known a period of time where social media didn't exist in some form, smartphones, all the rest of it. So how do we sort of get them to, without the ability to recall a time where we didn't have it, to put it in its proper perspective?
Well, 92% in Australia of kids over 12 have access to a smartphone as theirs. They would call it their phone, more than have a toilet in their homes. It's that level of pervasive. A lot of it is a habit then that we've gotten into, and the good thing is habits can be broken. If you don't say thank you, you can learn how to say thank you. It starts by not having it on all the time, because the addiction, which is what it is, it's a habit that you can't stop thinking about, no different than a tobacco addiction. You just want it. Your brain wants that feed, is to find those times of the day when you get it and also times of the day when you don't. Literally, how many of us actually turn it off? Turn it off. Leave it alone. Now, in schools, they try to do that, but what homeschooling has done, schooling from home, what Zoom has done, is let people have access to it along the way. And I think this holiday season, we won't have been back to school enough to break that habit. We've got to find times of the day where we do it. Like when I grew up, we had television maybe from 7 to 8 in the evening. That's the only time we watched it.
It's too bad if your favourite shows are on at 8:30.
Yeah.
Not going to happen.
We didn't have a tape in those days or the cloud. You just had to see them on reruns and hope. So what we have to do is find a way to turn it off and have those times. For example, when you visit with your family, do you just put a hat out? Everybody turns their phone in. And for 1 hour, we're just going to have a conversation. Do we have to be on it all the time? I'm watching now seniors who are in cafes sitting next to one another, texting themselves. Then right next, they could just have a conversation. I think we got to get control back. I think many kids want that, but we also have to fill our brains with positive influences. And I think that's the problem with this. It's deliberately been feeding us, and the big corporations running this are feeding off of our negativity. The only way is to stop it, turn it off, and turn it on for limited a bit of time. It'll be very angst for many parents for a long time getting people to wean back, and they're going to have to do it themselves, Mark.
Even more so, I reckon. And maybe even a mini step before you get to the turn off. Maybe just try for a couple of hours putting it in a different room, see how you go there.
Right. Particularly at night.
Oh, guilty as charged. Off I go. All right, as always, a pleasure to see him here, our Professor of Education from the University of Newcastle, John Fischetti. We'll talk to you next
Mark.
week.
2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.